welcome back to SFC's Food for Thought series. For those of you who are just seeing SFC for the first time, we are an advocacy group made by students and young professionals for students and young professionals who believe that Canada can have a strong future in resources, the economy, and the environment. Please connect with us on Instagram, Facebook, and LinkedIn at Students for Canada if you want to learn more about what we do. Today, we are hosting David Detomasi. David is an associate professor of international business and strategy at Queen's University Smith School of Business. Here he teaches courses on strategy, corporate and nonprofit governance, and geopolitics of global competition in undergraduate, MBA, and executive edition programs. Outside of teaching, David also consults on global business practices, including with the World Economic Forum, the Energy Resources Conservation Board of Alberta, Nexen, and the Ontario Public Service, as well as many more. David is a regular contributor to the media, whether it be through interviews or authoring opinion pieces. He covers topics such as the oil and gas industry, corporate and nonprofit governance, and global financial system and corporate strategy. He is also nearing the completion of the book manuscript Between Market and State, the Oil Multinational in Geopolitical Competition. So for those of you who are watching live or watching the recording, our word of the day is Kingston. So put that on, send that to us on social media if you hear it. And I will now share the spotlight with our guest. Welcome, David.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for that kind introduction, and thank you meeting the three of you. Just make sure you allow me to share my screen later. I think the host has to do that. I'll give you a bit more of a background for you and your listeners. I currently am a professor at the Smith School of Business, which is in Kingston. I've been here about 25 years. I'm a graduate of the Royal Military College as well. But I spent 20 years, the first 20 years of my life in Cochrane, Alberta. And I grew up there. And even then, I was enamored with the oil and gas industry when I was growing up, and the people that were in it, the energy that was around it, the sense of community that had been built upon it. All those things left a deep impression on me from my earliest memory. And I've been interested in it and a fan of it ever since. And even when I moved to Ontario, where matters of energy are sometimes perceived differently and certainly are rarely as top of mind as they are in Alberta, even though the events over the last year have kind of made that different. We clearly have some challenges on the energy front that I think we all have to address as Canadians. And so my goal in writing the book, which I'll talk about in a second, was to try to push a way forward on that particular path. Now, the kind introduction we just heard indicated that I was writing a book. Actually, I'm done, and I'm going to call it up, and I'm going to show you where it comes from. So hopefully that's it. Anyway, this is the slide deck that I had. Anyway, that's me, and this is the theme of my topic is return to rationality, some thoughts in the Canadian energy sector, more specifically on one issue with the energy sector, and that is the issue of divestment, which many universities and pension funds are considering, stopping the investment in oil and gas companies. So I'll keep going with it here a little bit. That's my plug of my own book. And that'll be available in July 15th on Amazon. And that's the title, and that's the cover shot. Now, a lot of people ask me, why did I write it? And, it's a good question. Largely because I was upset about the direction the energy debate in our country was taking. And largely because a lot of the people that were opining on energy from after I talked to them a little bit really didn't know very much about it, particularly oil. They didn't know where it came from. They didn't really know how the companies work. They didn't really know the economics behind it. They didn't really know how it was a constituent element to just about everything we use to live our lives, and that ending it or changing significantly away from it was not going to be an easy or simple task. And I wanted to demonstrate in that book why that was and where it would go. So I finished it. And for the last year, I've been dealing with the editor, getting it all ready and polished up. But normally when you finish something like that, you should feel a sense of completeness, a sense of wholeness. And but I didn't feel that, because this book was about the globe, about everything that's going on outside of Canada. And I said, there's an enormous amount of interesting stuff going in our country that I thought I didn't address in this particular book. And I thought it was time to do that. So what I'm doing as we speak is I'm preparing a book proposal, and I'd like to get the feedback of our listeners about what they think of it. about how we can address the energy problem specific in Canada. And the model that I was going to use or build on was this guy. I'm a big fan of Steven Pinker's work. He's written, I've written one book. He's written, I think, 11. They're all pretty long. The guy writes a lot, but he's a Harvard psychology professor, and he's interested in how the human mind works. And he's interested in how it is that we are often as not particularly rational on some of the things, decisions that we make. What is rationality? Why is it that people are able to believe things that are patently untrue? And what happens when they make decisions based on things other than a rational evaluation of the facts? And it usually leads to nowhere good. And I thought that would be a great framework to think about how we might address the problems afflicting Canadian energy, because I think that the debate has become overly emotive. I think it has become obviously polarized. I think it has become, in some cases, ideologically driven, both pro and con, and I don't think that's leading us anywhere good. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about what I think about that, and then I'm going to talk a little bit about how it applies to one particular sector of the energy economy. So what is Pinker talking about? What does this rationality model actually look like? It looks like this. All right, we need clear reasons for why we are doing stuff. And, that may seem like an obvious thing, but it actually isn't. People often don't step back and go through, why is it that I'm doing X, Y, or Z? And what more importantly, what am I trying to accomplish? And in your actions, you got to have some idea what the actual goal is and what you're trying to get to. And I don't see a lot of first principles talking in the Canadian energy sector about what these things actually are. You see a lot of single issue stuff. You see a lot of people that want to maximize oil production as maximum as possible, as quickly as possible, because that'll be economically strong. On the activist environmental side, you see people wanting to stop oil and gas production as quickly as possible because that would be good theoretically on the environmental side. Either way, I don't think we as a country can view oil and gas as just a issue, one or two. It is a bundle of things. And what prism are we going to use to be able to decipher what to do? And in it, I develop a concept of what the national interest might be. What do we stand for, both our values as Canadians? What do we need in order to pursue and protect those values? A strong economy with also a strong commitment to leadership on the environmental front. I don't think these things are mutually exclusive. And we need to have a holistic view of what it is we're trying to do, because it's easy to grab a headline on one or two single issues, but it doesn't solve the problem. It doesn't actually move us forward. Point number 3, you need to count and measure. Stories don't cut it. Everybody has a story about oil and gas, or stories about anything, about I saw this, or I happened to me, and we I hear this in cigarette smoking, right? People know the 90-year-old who smoked all their life and never got sick, so they don't believe the statistics that is likely to make you sick. It should be evidence-based, and evidence means counting. Evidence means measuring. Evidence means progress over time. And that's hard, very statistically driven work, but it's absolutely necessary to really decipher what the trends are. Point number 4, oil and gas is not a courtroom. When I take a look at what's currently going on in debate in Canada, what I see is a lot of people advocating either being the prosecution, trying to prove, that Johnny Depp slandered Amber Heard, or that's a common thing, or trying to prove that oil and gas is bad. And I see a defense attorney saying, I got to prove that oil and gas is good. It's not a courtroom. All right. It's not as if we have to adopt the role of prosecutor or defense of this issue. We need to say, okay, there are some good things and some bad things. Let's talk about that. 5th, we've got to calm down. Oil is a commodity. Just like soybeans, just like steel, it has bigger impact than these other sorts of things. Now, we have to give it the attention that it's due, but we can't make it the sole reason or the sole driver of everything that goes on in the world. All right, it's a commodity that operates in certain ways and certain measures, but it does some things and not others. But let's not glamorize it, but let's not demonize it. Okay, so balance. We need to make the case. Once we've decided rationally on what we think a way forward is, we need to make the case of what that is and why it matters. And the final thing, and this is something I typically really focus on with my undergraduates, is optimism. One of the things I'm really worried about for young people generally, I'm a father of 3 teenagers about to go off to university, is I'm sensing a real pessimism about the state of the world, particularly the environmental world, that somehow we are all going to evaporate in a fire dust in 12 years and there's no future and what can we do about it? And that is patently untrue. There are things we can do about it. The world is getting better in many, many regards, and young people are key to making it go even further. Lots of opportunity out there, but people are coming in believing that they can't do much about it, and that's just not true. So these are the issues I was trying to address in the next book I'm going to write, and hopefully it'll hit your stores sometime before you're my age. Let's hope. All right, so let's keep going. A couple of things about it that I wanted to talk about. All right, we're moving into the issue of divestment. All right, there's no doubt there's a couple of things that have happened over the past 10 years or 8 years that we need to keep in mind. What I've got here is a couple of very simple graphs, cribbed from the U.S. Department of Energy, oil prices in 2014 to 2021, as on the left-hand side. Massive fall in 2014, cutting from about $100 a barrel, a bit more, down to almost 45, stays there for almost 6 years, creeps back up over to 65 in 2018, 2019, then 2020. The impact of the pandemic is very clear there. Oil prices, and one day fell through the zero floor. They were so bad, and has crept up into November, about a year, a little less than a year ago, to the $80 barrel range. And today, May 2021 to April 22, is now creeping right back up to $100, $110. And some forecasts, Goldman Sachs and JP Morgan, are arguing it's going to be $175 a barrel for the year out. Now, there's a couple of questions we should think about there when we look at what happened in Canada's oil and gas sector during that long period on the left when oil prices were generally depressed, and what has happened, what will happen during the period right now when we see an increase in prices that may go on for a while and may massively increase. Well, I'll tell you what happened, and this is sort of, we're going into the divestment debate, and I've got about 5 to 10 more minutes here on this. So I'm going to go get my other slide deck up. Now, this slide deck I borrowed from a friend at Barclays who had prepared it for me for a class. Now, it is their material, and I want to give full credit to them, but since I used it for a class, I think I'm safe using it here. But here's one slide. What happened in that period, 2014 to 2020? Well, people stopped floating shares for oil and gas companies, basically. The market dropped out. Companies weren't issuing new shares. New companies weren't issuing new shares. Basically, the value of Canadian issuances literally dropped to the bottom. People were arguing that the oil and gas sector was dead. Investment was running out of the Alberta oil sands as fast as it possibly could. These are really tough times when people are trying to float or develop new businesses, and this lasted for 5 or 6 years easily. Essentially, new share issues started to drop through the floor. And secondarily, another slide that they prepared, investment in the global oil and gas industry fell through the bottom. In 2014, just before the price fall, global investment in the oil and gas industry was $750 billion a year in CapEx. Within 2 or 3 years, that had been cut by 2/3. By 2014, 2015, we were talking about a net investment loss of $400 billion. People weren't willing to put money into a business that seemed to have a surplus of oil, didn't need any extra kind of investment, and that we were going to be fine, and we were transitioning away from it anyway. Now, I and a few other people were really worried about this, because by not investing in 2015, 2016, 2017, I argued you were setting yourself up for a big shortage when the global economy recovered. I argued in 2019, 2020. Now, COVID put 2 years behind that particular, knocked 2 years off that prediction. But now we're coming out of COVID in 2022, and what does the world have a problem with? Shortage, compounded by geopolitical risk. And that's driving the price up. So people made a premature judgment about the profitability of oil and gas investment, the necessity of oil and gas investment, and the need for oil and gas investment for Canadian national interests, which mean providing a stable source of energy to our allies in Western Europe. But even while all this was going on, this is one interesting part about Canadian oil and gas companies. They didn't stop, in fact, reinvested in what we now call environmental, social, and governance activities. All through that period, we were some of the leading period groups. We worked very hard on reducing our environmental input. We worked very hard on our governance process to be more inclusive and diverse in who we have on our boards of directors. We cared very much about all, and this was at the time when we were being hit enormously hard, both on the equity issue front and on the investment front. And we still were able to make this sort of progress. So what kind of progress can we likely make when we actually have some money that are flowing back into the sector and the sector starts booming again, as it has been doing for the past roughly year? I'm enormously optimistic. I mean, if you're doing this on the hard times, what do you think is going to happen when you start getting the good times? And it's a heck of a story to tell, and we don't always tell it the way that we want. In fact, we have to tell it against people who seem to think the data indicates the opposite. These are often folks who run university pension funds, or at least the people that petition those funds. So let's talk about this investment thing, this divestment thing, okay? All right, so just give me a chance to hopefully do this again. Gotta go back to my other data point. Let's talk about divestment. This has been a very hot topic in Canadian universities, especially in other places, for the past 5 to 7 years. The idea being that large pension funds who hold my and everybody's pension here that we've been investing in during our working career should divest from oil and gas investment. And it's often put on pressure from student groups who argue that they want this university to take this step, most of the time because they believe that it will somehow hasten the transition to a greener economy, will somehow slow down investments in oil and gas generally, and will make an impact, at least a moral one, on the world. And while I understand that argument, I disagree with it. All right, I don't think it will make much of an impact, and it'll actually do more harm than good. And this is why I think that. When you're actually thinking about a problem, and I got 2 more slides to talk about this, you have to ask yourself, if I do this, what's going to happen? What's the second, third, and fourth order effects if we do this? We may get a bump and feeling good about ourselves if we don't invest in a certain company, but let's keep going with that. Okay, what else is going to happen? Well, number 1, we're not going to stop oil and gas companies from issuing shares. Pension funds don't buy new shares, they buy existing ones on the secondary market. So if a company is going to float shares, it's still going to be able to find the money to do that. You're not stopping companies that have an attractive value proposition from doing it. All you're doing is that in the secondary market, the shares won't be able to be bought by your pension fund. Point number 2, that's going to hurt people in Canada who run the pension fund industry. If you collapse the universe of places where they can put money, starting with oil and gas, well, that's a big swath of the areas in which they're supposed to be able to invest. Now, it was easy to avoid investing in oil and gas in 2014 to 2020. There was no money to be made there anyway, because the price of oil is so low. It's going to be a little bit difficult now when you actually have money to be made to make that same argument to your pensioners that you're avoiding profitable investments because of this. But hey, if you've seen the markets over the past year, pensioners are a bit worried. They want to make sure they have their investments, their retirement in place. Pension funds may underperform. The pension community would be less competitive. Where does it stop? Do we not invest in plastic companies? Do we not invest in steel and cement companies? Do we not invest in lots of other places that are somehow linked to oil and gas? Pretty soon, if you chase this down, you start losing major investment areas. And the final one I argue for Canada is, I think, this is the one I make in class, you cannot influence a game you don't play, right? You can withdraw from something, but then what? it's a little like falling on your sword. You get a lot of people clap, a lot of people say, oh, that's a martyr, they did well, but you're not in the game anymore. You can't make any sort of positive impact on how the particular business is run. So I would argue we should be more invested in Canada Oil and Gas and keep doing the ESG stuff that I talked about earlier. And if we do that, we can build a real powerful strength in Canada that is necessary, and the data indicates it's going to be around for a long period of time yet. Final slide, and I'll take questions. Okay. Yeah, that's it. Canada is the third largest oil reserves in the world and high levels of natural gas. We have the problem of what are we going to do with them? We're divided about this, and it's feeding into divisions that are already in the country based largely on geography already. So it is not just a question of a commodity. It is a commodity, but rationally thinking through a real plan of management is not only dicey, but demands real political leadership to demand how we're going to do this in a way that furthers our collective national interests. What I would like you to take away, all of you, if we did X, what would happen? Always think about that when someone proposes a radical solution or emotionally laden, clear solution to a problem. Really, you know, that, not to be cynical, but be skeptical. If we did that, what else would then happen? Second, third order outcomes. The final point I made in the book is I've argued that the one I just wrote is I argued that political debate on environmentalism should be toned down a bit, because I think that dealing with environmental challenges is one problem, but we have a lot of problems. We have an aging population. We have large levels of national debt run up from COVID. We have poor competitiveness markings. We have, immigration challenges. We have a lot of challenges in the country that need to be met. It's not just to this one. And whatever we do on energy is going to have to somehow take into account all the other things we have to be worried about as well. So I'm always a little bit worried about someone who argues too heavily on one issue, because we don't just have one issue. We have many. Anyway, it's about 20, 25 minutes, as I was promised. I want to talk to you a little bit about what I thought I might do in the next book. I'd be interested to hear your questions and comments if it's the right rabbit hole to go down. And if it is, maybe I'll do it. Anyway, I'm going to end my show there. I will share these with the organizers when this is over. And I'll be happy to handle or go through any comments or questions that people have.